The sky over Verex burned red, filled with fire and smoke as alien warships rained destruction upon the jungle world. The trees below were ancient and tall, but even they fell like twigs under the endless barrage of plasma. The capital city trembled, its golden towers cracking, its people running through the streets in panic. High above, 3 powerful alien fleets attacked without mercy the Rethuri, with their black, claw-shaped barges. The Sikh swarm ships, quick and cruel, and the massive core dreadnoughts, floating like metal mountains. They came for one reason: to destroy the Zelari Empire and kill its ruler, Queen Aerolith. Once she had ruled proudly over 100 worlds, but now her own allies had turned on her. Betrayals had eaten through her court. The galaxy had already written her off as a fallen queen. Her soldiers were outnumbered and outgunned. Her shields flickered and collapsed. The enemy had reached her final defense tower. All seemed lost. Some of her advisors begged her to flee. Others dropped their weapons and vanished. Stood tall at the heart of her command chamber, her gaze fixed on the horizon of fire, her voice calm, though her world was crumbling around her. Then, without warning, space cracked open above the battlefield. Another fleet emerged from hyperspace, small ships, simple in design and old by modern standards. Their hulls bore a forgotten symbol, Earth. At first, the attackers laughed. No one feared Earth. Humans were seen as weak and slow to act. They were rarely invited to join galactic alliances. Their weapons were considered outdated. And yet the first blast from the human warship cut straight through a Sikh's vessel with perfect precision. That ship, long and black like an arrow, moved, fast, and without hesitation. Its name was Resolve. The laughter stopped. It fired again, splitting a Rethuri barge in half. The dreadnoughts responded, but the Resolve weaved between their shots like a dancer in fire, and then it wasn't alone. Other Earth ships fell in behind it, flying in tight formation, punching holes through enemy lines. They didn't come to negotiate. They came with a purpose. In the heart of the Resolve stood Captain Reese Calder, his face calm, eyes cold, his gloved hand resting on the tactical table. He watched the battle like a chess match, each move measured, each enemy marked. He didn't give grand speeches, simply said, "Target engines. Break their formation. Don't stop." Around him, his crew obeyed without hesitation. Back on Virex, the Queen looked up as a human drop pod landed outside her tower. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't royal, but it was real. A message blinked. On her screen, short and clear, "Hold the line. Help is here." That was the moment something changed. It's not just in the battle, but in the galaxy. For the first time in generations, a human force had arrived not to ask for help, but to give it. And they were winning. The other empires watching from afar paused. They had expected a slaughter. Instead, they saw precision, fury, and something older than any empire. Raw human defiance. Above the broken jungle, the Resolve kept moving like a shadow of judgment, and Captain Reese Calder said only 2 words: "Begin the hunt." ChatGPT said, Captain Reese Calder never thought of himself as a hero. He was a soldier trained, quiet, and deadly when needed. He didn't chase medals or care about glory. He cared about survival, duty, and doing what was right. Earth had changed. Over the years, it wasn't the weak, ignored planet it used to be. But the galaxy still treated humans like they were behind the times. Earth's weapons were called old. Its fleets were small. Its name was often left out of important meetings. That was fine with Reese. He didn't want fame. He wanted results. When Earth's scouts picked up secret transmissions about the attack on the Zelari Queen, most thought it was not their concern. But Reese saw it differently. The ones who had turned against Queen Aerolith were the same powers that had been growing. Stronger and bolder, threatening weaker worlds, and spreading across the stars like a disease. He knew their next step would be Earth. If they destroyed the Zelari Empire, there would be nothing stopping them. So he made a choice, he gathered. His old team called in favors and took 50 ships into deep space. His mission wasn't to protect a throne, it was to strike first, before Earth became the next battlefield. Shadow Team 7 was ready. We're not the largest unit, but they were the deadliest. Harlow, his second in command, was sharp with both her mind and her blade. Cruz, the silent sniper, could hit a moving target across a valley. Milla, their medic, carried sorrow in her eyes, but no one moved faster to save a life. Together, they had survived asteroid ambushes, zero-gravity battles, and Deathworld patrols. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. As soon as they reached the outer edges of Varex, Rhys studied the enemy formation and smiled, not because it was easy, but because he saw a weakness. The attacking fleets were large, but uncoordinated. They relied on numbers and brute force. Rhys relied on timing, speed, and fear. He split his forces. While the main fleet kept the enemy distracted in orbit, Shadow Team dropped silently into the jungle below. No announcement, no light. Just silent pods slicing through the clouds. On the ground, the alien invaders were already setting up command. Bases believing the Queen's forces were broken. They weren't prepared for what came next. Rhys and his team moved through the jungle like shadows. They wore light armor, painted in natural tones. They used short-range weapons and knives. They didn't fight head-on. They ambushed, struck, and vanished. Rhys led the way, marking targets and setting traps. One night, they destroyed a SIAC scout post using only wire, fire, and patience. Another night, they captured a corps commander, pulled secrets from his mind, and left his camp in flames. The alien forces began to panic. They called it sabotage at first, and they called it human madness. But one word started spreading among their ranks like a virus. Shade, they believed. A ghost was hunting them. That in the dark, something moved too fast to see, too smart to stop. Rhys didn't deny it. He leaned into the fear. He left behind symbols carved into trees. He hacked combs and played the sound of human breathing during enemy meetings. He made them doubt the air, the trees, the shadows. Every time they thought they had him, he was already gone. The Queen's remaining guards, watching from broken towers, began to whisper as well. They had never seen humans fight like this. It wasn't just war. It was precision. It was control. Behind every move was one man who refused to let his planet become the next victim. Rhys didn't care if they remembered his name, but he would make sure they remembered what happened when Earth stopped being silent. And with every step through the burning jungles of Varex, he walked closer to the Queen, who still believed no one would come. The jungles of Varex were thick and alive, filled with strange sounds and hidden dangers. Towering trees twisted toward the sky, their roots like walls, their leaves wide enough to cover tanks. The air was heavy, wet, and hot, and the ground squelched under every step, but Rhys Calder moved through it without fear. Shadow Team 7 followed him closely, their eyes sharp, weapons ready. They had trained for every kind of terrain, frozen moons, metal cities, acid storms, but they respected the wildness of this world. The enemy thought the jungle would slow them down. Instead, it became their cover, their shield. At night, glowing insects flew through the air like stars, and huge creatures howled in the dark. But it wasn't the beasts that scared the enemy. It was the humans. Rhys had chosen his targets carefully. The first strike was a Seek's relay station hidden inside a cliff. The Seeks, small insect-like aliens, never saw the humans coming. By the time they noticed movement, their power lines were cut, their radios down, and explosions tore through their base. The second target was a Rithari forward camp-heavy warriors with thick armor and long rifles. Rhys waited until rain covered the area in fog, and he and Cruz slipped into the tents and planted charges on the support beams. One blast brought down the hill above them, burying half the camp in silence. Panic began to spread. The jungle was no longer safe. The enemy started building higher walls, cutting down trees, setting fire to parts of the forest to drive the humans out. But the fires only made things worse. Smoke made them blind, and Shadow Team struck again and again from the dark. Harlow hacked enemy systems, playing false orders across their radios. Milla, fast and fearless, darted between trees to pull wounded allies to safety. Each kill was clean. Each move was silent. The Queen's loyal guards, who had once given up hope, began to follow human signals, watching as small strikes led to big wins. Reese taught them to fight differently, not with fear, but with focus. He showed them how to use the land, how to break the enemy's lines by targeting leaders, supply paths, and come towers. The Queen's army, once scattered, slowly found its rhythm again. But it was Reese who carried the fear of the jungle. The enemy called him the Shade, and stories grew wild. Some said he was a machine, others a ghost made of war. Some believed he never slept, that he moved through trees like wind, that he could hear their whispers before they spoke. Reese didn't care what they said. He watched maps, tracked movements, and kept striking. One night they rescued a Zellery scout who had been caught by the core. His eyes widened when he saw humans. "You're real," he whispered. "The jungle speaks of you." Reese just nodded and moved on. His mission was not to inspire. It was to break the enemy before they could take the world. Every fallen warlord brought Virex closer to hope. Every enemy base they destroyed made Earth's message louder. Reese never shouted it. He didn't need to. His actions said it clear. Earth is not prey. No. And deep in the burning jungle, that message took root in the minds of allies and enemies alike. The great towers of the Zellery capital stood in ruin, cracked and burned, with smoke rising like dark fingers into the sky. Streets once filled with light and music, now echoed with silence and rubble. Queen Arleth remained inside the central tower, surrounded by broken walls and fading lights, her golden armor dulled with ash and blood. She had not left her post. She had watched her people fall, her allies vanish, her power crumble. She still stood, tall and proud, ready to die with her crown if needed. Then something strange happened. Ports came in from the lower cities. Enemy commanders were vanishing. Camps were being destroyed from within. Ships were retreating without orders. At first she thought it was lies or some trick of the enemy. But the stories grew louder and clearer. Her guards spoke of a shadow, a force moving through the jungle with the precision of a god. Then came a message, short and calm, delivered by a captured enemy's own comlink. "Your enemies are falling, stay alive." Moments later, a sleek black drop pod crashed into her courtyard. Her guards aimed their weapons, but no shots were fired. The pod hissed open, and a human stepped out, covered in dust and plasma marks, helmet tucked under his arm. His armor was battered, his gloves burned, but his eyes were steady. He looked up at the Queen without bowing. "I'm Reese Calder," he said. "You're not dead yet, so we're ahead of schedule." The Queen didn't know whether to laugh or strike him. She had never met someone so direct. "Came alone?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I brought enough." She studied him closely. He had no royal badges, no alien jewels, no robes or flags, just weapons and grit. "You're human," she finally said. "That's right," Reese answered. "You saved my empire." "I broke your enemies," he said. "There's a difference." Her lips curled slightly, not in anger but interest. No one spoke to her like that. No one had the courage. She stepped closer. "Why would Earth help me?" "Because if they finish you, we're next," Reese said. "Or I don't wait for enemies to knock on my door." His words were sharp, but his tone was calm. She could feel the fire behind them, not pride, but purpose. She turned to her remaining officers. "This man led the force that scattered the fleets above us." They nodded. "Then Earth has done what my own blood would not." Arleth looked back at Reese. "I owe you a debt." Reese shook his head. "You owe your people a future. That's all." For a long moment, the Queen said nothing. Then she removed her crown and placed it on the table beside her. "Then let us begin again," she said, her voice soft but strong. "Not as queen and stranger, but as survivors." And from that moment, something unspoken formed between them, respect forged in fire, and the first spark of something new rising from the ashes of a fallen empire. The days after the battle were filled with rebuilding, but the work did not begin with stone or steel, it began with trust. Queen Arleth walked through the heart of her ruined capital with Reese Calder beside her, the streets still scarred by fire, the air heavy with smoke and memories. Her people watched from broken windows and shattered homes as the tall human captain moved quietly through their city. Not as a conqueror, but as something else. something different. He gave no speeches, demanded no rewards. Instead, he studied. Defenses met with her remaining commanders and asked only one question. What do you still have? From there, the queen saw the truth. Reese did not care about glory or thrones. He cared about survival, about preparing for what was coming next. So she listened. She set aside old ways and allowed him to train her soldiers. Under the open sky, in the center of the ruined palace grounds, human tactics met Zelari courage. Reese drilled them in small unit strikes, fast movement, teamwork, and discipline. Gone were the bright banners and slow marches. In their place came focus, sharp orders, and silent readiness. Harlow showed the Zelari how to track with sensors and instincts. Cruz taught them to shoot with patience. Ela turned medics into lifelines. Fast and fearless. Even the youngest recruits saw a change in themselves. They didn't feel like pawns anymore. They felt like warriors. The queen watched it all, often silent, but always near. At night, she and Reese would talk by dim firelight never. About feelings, but about strategies, allies, enemies, and what Earth had endured in its rise. He told her how humanity had suffered in silence, how they had built strength in shadows while the galaxy mocked them. She listened carefully, and each story added weight to her growing respect for him. The queen began sending messages out across. The stars not as pleas for help, but as clear warnings. Zelari Empire stands, Earth stands with us. If you fear them, you should. One by one, those who had turned against her heard her voice again and felt uncertainty creep into their hearts. If Earth had such strength, if Reese could break fleets with only a few ships, then perhaps this new alliance was not something to challenge. Some tried to dismiss it as luck. Others called it a temporary victory, but the truth was harder to ignore. Reese had changed the course of a war. The queen no longer ruled with just her name. She ruled with him at her side. They did not always agree. There were arguments behind closed doors. She had her pride, her history. He had his instincts, his stubborn rules. But the results spoke louder than the words. Cities were repaired, defenses rebuilt, morale soared. And more than that, the people believed again, not in a crown, but in what the queen had become through the fire. The whispers that once called Reese a shadow or a ghost now spoke of him with awe. They called him the Protector. The queen began using that name herself, not out of ceremony, but from something deeper. He had defended her empire, but he had also shown her what leadership could become, not tradition, but action. And though Reese said little in return, he stayed, not because he had to, but because he saw something worth guarding. The world of Varex, broken as it was, had spirit, and the queen, once distant, now stood like a warrior among her people. Together they formed something no one had expected, a union of fire and stone, of silence and power. And as rumors of a final attack reached them, as the last and greatest enemy fleets began to gather, the queen stood on the balcony of her tower, looking into the stars. Reese joined her, hands behind his back. She did not ask if they could win. She already knew. With him beside her, they had already changed everything. ChatGPT said, "The stars above Varex shimmered with quiet before the storm, but that calm did not last. Word came quickly that the enemy was returning stronger, angrier, desperate to crush what they had failed to destroy. The largest fleets yet had gathered from across the galaxy, bringing warships older than some moons and weapons designed for one purpose: to end the Zelari, queen and the humans who stood with her. There were over 1,000 enemy ships, massive and well-armed, stretching across space like a wall of fire. But Reese Calder did not flinch. He stood on the bridge of the Resolve, watching the screen as red lights filled the sky. His face was still, his voice calm. "Let them come," he said, and his crew responded without fear. Earth's small fleet, though outnumbered, moved like a blade. Their ships, though fewer, were faster, smarter, tighter in formation. Reese had drilled them not for numbers, but for precision. They didn't waste shots. They didn't panic. Above the planet, they formed a shield-eraser wall of steel and light, blocking the path to the surface. Below, the Queen's new forces, reshaped by human training, stood ready. Her capital, once burning, now had stronger defenses, new turrets, fresh troops. She walked among them not as a distant ruler, but as one of them, armored and steady. The battle began. The sky turned white with explosions. Enemy cruisers charged, sending waves of drones and fire, but Earth's ships met them with sharp strikes. Reese led the counterattack himself, not from a chair, but in the heart of battle. He flew the Resolve straight into the storm, diving between enemy formations, striking weak spots, and pulling away just before fire could reach him. His orders were fast and clear. Break their engines, disable weapons, leave them stranded. Shadow Team 7 took dropships to board the enemy's key command vessels. Reese and his team fought in tight corridors, planting bombs, disabling shields, moving through smoke and steel like a ghost squad. Each time an enemy thought they had them trapped, they vanished. Each time a new fleet arrived, they were already outflanked. Above them, the Queen's ships, still learning, followed Reese's tactics. They didn't chase, they didn't scatter. They held together, fought smart, and trusted his plan. On the surface, the Queen herself took up a rifle and fought beside her guards. Her presence was a fire to her people. She no longer ruled from a throne, but from the front lines. With every charge repelled, with every new wave beaten back, the defenders grew stronger. Reese, covered in soot and bruises, returned to his ship after leading a boarding assault and looked at the battlefield. Dozens of enemy ships were now drifting, broken. Some exploded quietly in the distance. Others turned and fled. The tide had turned, and the impossible had happened. The humans, outnumbered 10-1, were winning. Not by chance, but by skill, by unity, by refusing to break. As the final enemy dreadnought tried to fire its last weapon, Reese ordered all guns on it. Light filled the stars as it split apart, a flaming trail behind it, then silence. No more attacks. Only the soft sound of Cum's breathing with static, and the stars returning to stillness. Reese stood on the bridge, hands resting against the console. He didn't cheer, he simply exhaled. On the surface, the Queen looked to the sky and knew they had done what no one believed possible. They had held the line. They had shattered the strongest fleets, and they had shown the galaxy that Earth and Varex, together, could not be broken. Smoke still curled through the sky, and wreckage floated silently above Varex when the final message came. It's not through official channels, but as a quiet order spoken from the highest tower of the capital. Queen Aerolith stood tall among her guards. Her armor marked by battle, her eyes clear with purpose, said 3 words that echoed across the palace floor. "Bring me the human." Her voice carried no anger, only command, and her guards moved without delay. The battle was over. The war at least paused, and now the world was watching. Across the ruined cities, across ships both Solari and Earth-made, people whispered of what had happened, how the human fleet had come when no one else did. How they had destroyed ships 5 times their size, how they had landed and fought on, foot like ghosts, and how the Queen herself had stood with them. Soldiers from both worlds waited in quiet as Reese Calder was brought to the royal tower. He came without hesitation, his armor still bearing scorch marks, his expression calm as always, though his eyes showed the weight of everything that had happened. He had no crown, no cape, no medal zone, the steady presence of someone who had done what he promised. When he entered the hall, the Queen stood alone at the far end, a wide window behind her showing the stars and the broken enemy ships drifting like ashes. She stepped down from the throne platform and walked toward him, her steps slow but strong. "You saved my world," she said plainly, her voice reaching every corner of the chamber. Not with fleets, not with speeches, but with courage. Reese remained still, watching her carefully, as if unsure what she truly wanted. "I did what needed to be done," he replied. The Queen nodded. "Others had power. They ran. You had fire. You stayed." She looked at the soldiers and advisors standing along the edges of the room, then back at him. "You didn't ask for loyalty. You earned it." There was silence, but it was not empty. It was full of breath held in awe. She turned to face her people. "Let it be known," she said clearly, "that the one who broke our enemies is not a stranger. He is not a visitor. He is a protector of this world, defender of the broken and the brave. Her words rang like steel. Earth has no throne here, but it has my loyalty. Every Zelari in the chamber knelt. Every Earth soldier stood taller. Reese, still silent, did not move. But something changed in his eyes. Some small part of his guarded heart opened. The Queen stepped closer and spoke softly, so only he could hear. "You didn't come to lead," she said, "but they will follow you anyway." Reese didn't answer right away. He looked past her, out the window, at the stars beyond. "Then we lead together," he finally said. "Not as a commander, but as a man who had found something worth staying for." And with that, the galaxy shifted not through force, but through the quiet bond between two warriors who had faced the fire and stood unbroken. Time moved forward, and though the fires of war had faded, the memory of the battle still lived in every corner of Varex. The cities began to heal, broken towers stood again. Lights returned to streets once dark, and laughter slowly replaced silence. But the greatest change wasn't in the buildings or the skies. It was in the people. The Zelari, once proud and distant, now trained side by side with humans. Their weapons were sharper, their minds clearer, their hearts stronger. They no longer waited for orders from far-off rulers. They followed those who stood with them during the darkest hour. Reese Calder remained on Varex, not because of duty, but because something in him had changed. He walked the rebuilt streets, without guards, nodding to young soldiers who had once only known fear. Children followed him, curious and bold, some asking if he really took down a dreadnought with just a team of 7. He never answered with stories. He only smiled and moved on, leaving legends to grow on their own. The Queen often walked beside him, their steps quiet but full of meaning. They spoke of the future of rebuilding, not just walls, but the ways their people thought. She wanted peace, but she also wanted strength. She had seen what happened when power rested only in symbols. Together they created a new council, half Zelari, half human trained, chosen not by blood but by merit. Reese helped design a defense system that could spot a fleet days before it arrived. Earth sent more advisors, not commanders. They didn't seek control. They offered support, tools, and knowledge earned through long, painful history. Across the stars, other worlds took notice. Former enemies sent quiet messages, first to test, then to learn. How had Earth, with so little, struck down so many? How had the Queen, once a fallen figure, risen stronger than ever? The answer was not in machines or magic. It was in will, in unity, in the courage to stand together. Reese's team, Shadow 7 now trained others. Harlow opened a tactics school. Cruz taught silent movement to alien scouts. Mila, once broken by loss, now led rescue missions into dangerous systems. They weren't symbols, they were examples. Proof that strength came not from size, but from purpose. And at night, when the stars were clear and the noise of the day faded, Reese and Aerolith would sit in the garden high above the city. She would ask him about Earth, about rivers and storms and forests made of ice. He would describe things simply, as if each word painted a picture only she could see. He told her of old mistakes, of forgotten heroes, of how humanity had survived not by chance but by refusing to kneel. She listened with quiet wonder, not because Earth was powerful, but because it had suffered and still stood. Reese never asked for more than peace. He had fought his war. He had saved a world. Now he helped shape one, far beyond Varex. Across the silent systems, the message spread without need for words. If you rise against the weak, beware the quiet ones. Beware the ones who stand last. Beware the human who does not run. For when the galaxy had turned cold and darkness came with fire, a single voice had answered, not with fear, but with fury. And that voice still echoed in the stars.